I have the dubious distinction of introducing our next speaker here this afternoon. Her name is Lesley Everett. Lesley is internationally renowned as an expert on branding. She has spoken literally all over the world. A few years ago, she served as the president of GSF, the Global Speakers Federation. Who knew there was such a group? Actually, I think it was the Galaxy Speaking Federation, but was the top person in the world, in the universe, in the galaxy, leading speakers all over. And her expertise is on branding. She is the real deal. And something that you need to know, besides finding out that she is the real deal, she makes herself available for a 90-minute consult. And so if you are in need of a brand refresh, consider booking a 90-minute consult with her, 1 or 2 90-minute pinpoints, and create a shift in your brand. She is the real deal. She is my friend. May I present to you Lesley Everett.
Thank you, Mark. Wow, what an intro. Thank you for that. I've got to live up to that now. And it's a true privilege and honor for you to introduce me. We don't get that opportunity very often. So thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me here today. So the first thing often I want to talk about with branding, and particularly the people element of the brand, is I want to ask you the question: do you know what people say about you behind your back? Do you know what they say about you when you're not there? Those words they choose to use to describe you to other people. Because if you don't know what people say about you when you're not in the room, then you really don't know what your brand is. And as some of you will know, and I've spoken to you before, and Mark certainly knows, is that the focus of the work that I do around branding is very much on the personality of the brand, who you are and who you represent as the brand. I don't do all the logos and all the sexy, colorful stuff. Often that happens before the piece that I do, and often I get to work with companies that have missed that piece out. But it's so important that we get to the root of the personality behind the brand today. So you all have a brand already, whether you've consciously thought about it or not, whether you've consciously developed it or not. And that is particularly what people say about you behind your back when you're not in the room. So a few things to share with you in a short session today, and a lot of you are in different roles. A lot of you are speakers, authors, but it's what next? You know, you've got that expertise, you've written that great book, you've got that speech, but what is it that you need to do next to leverage that, to go to the next level, to stand out? And the work that I do is really centered around differentiation. How do you really stand out and differentiate yourself authentically, and then build visibility around that to be a consistent brand that people can talk about easily, and can recall stuff about you so simply that they can talk about you behind your back in a way that you want to be talked about. The walk and tour methodology that I developed is focused on a couple of those things. And a lot of the time I spend speaking with clients, coaching, training, as well as speaking, on identifying what the brand really is from that authentic viewpoint, and then articulating that. Because I think that's often the case when we think about, well, what is our brand? It's how do I actually articulate it? I often say you can't see the label from inside the bottle. So having a look from the outside in, I can more easily see that. In fact, one of my clients said to me recently, do you know what you feel like you're doing for me is I have a whole ton of strands of spaghetti in my head. And what you're doing is pulling out one at a time and making sense of that, so I can make sense of the brand, and then we can put it back into my head again in some sort of semblance. So it's really identifying and articulating the brand. And 2 elements of the walk and tour methodology that I want to share with you today are really thinking about the personality, your backstory, how you might identify that, thinking about it from a different way, and then clarifying the expertise, the result of what it is that you do for clients, and how do you, what is it that you give them as an end result. Often, people ask me, well, what's the difference between brand and reputation? And this is my take on it, that brand really equals that bold intention that we all set out to do. That's the promise that we give people, that guarantee of this is what you're going to get when you work with me, all that great marketing blurb that we all need to write and come up with. And we can come up with clever words, and often it's tough to live up to that, but that is the bold intention. I believe that is the brand. But your reputation today really is the reality of that brand. And in your client's eyes and to the eyes of the outside world, the reality is actually how you make them feel when they read your book, when they hear you speak, when they interact with you in any way, digitally, face-to-face, live, remote. It's how you make them feel. That's their reality, and that's where your reputation actually builds from. I think it's worth being reminded of that the reputation is the longevity of the brand, and that every single day we're adding layers to that. And of course, your reputation equals the referrals that we all need. If our business could run off referrals, then how wonderful would that be? I don't know if any of you go back over your previous year's client list and look at where your clients have come in from. I know that I always celebrate a little bit every year when I can see that over 80% of business that's come in the last year has come from referrals, repeat business, word of mouth. I think we're doing something right if we can say that. So this is where it sort of stems from. I just mentioned about layers being added to your brand with every interaction. And I think this image that I wanted to share with you here is something that you can really take away and remember to keep you on track with your brand, that consistency. So everything we do every day, from every session that we're involved in now, every remote session, every presentation, every meeting, every social media post, every phone call, every text message, we're adding a layer all the time to our brand and our reputation. But because we don't think about it consciously enough, we're not sure whether it's weakening and diluting our brand or whether it's reinforcing it effectively. Much like this pearl in the oyster, the pearl grows organically over a period of time as layers get added to it. It gradually evolves to become the pearl that it is. So everything you're doing every day is polishing that pearl. Some things may weaken and dilute it, but if we're not clear, we don't know. So I'd really urge you to think about the identity and the articulation of that brand, and then stick with it with everything that you're doing. Not fire hose approach to social media, for example, just to be keeping it in alignment and on track. And that's what I hope to do with a lot of my clients every time I'm working with them. I often say to people that a way to go back and think about what your brand is, what you really stand for, and that authentic core is to go back through your life history so far and think about what are some of the common threads that have always been with you. And I had a great example of this when I first wrote my first book, which was called Walking Tall. Those of you who haven't met me, by the way, I'm only 5'1.5" tall. So, and that half inch is pretty important to me. And so walking tall has nothing to do with being physically tall. And I love giraffes. I love, my favorite place in the world is South Africa, and going on safari, and any opportunity I get to go, I will go. And obviously that hasn't been for a while, so I'm hoping to get back there next year. So Walking Tall logo is synonymous with the giraffe, and also standing out from the crowd when you're not necessarily that tall. And when I wrote the book, and I had a contract with McGraw-Hill back in 2004 in the UK, and I didn't have the title for the book. And my company was called something else completely at that point, and they kept pushing me for the title, and I just couldn't come up with the title. And what I did was to think back through my life history so far and thought, what are some of the common threads that have always been with me that I can try and build up a title from? You know, it's stuff I help people with now. Isn't it just awful when you have to apply your own stuff to yourself? It's really tough. So I had to go back through that and think about my life history. And one of the memories I had when I thought back through my history, was when I was at middle school. I was about 10, 11 years old, and I was smaller than a lot of the other kids at school. And I hated being small. It wasn't necessarily that easy to stand out, I guess. And we had a system in our school called the school colours that meant if you represented your school at music and sport, you got your school colours. And for us, that meant a really bright pink and red striped tie that we wore with our uniform and a big badge on our jacket. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to get the school colours, because then I can get that tie and that badge and I can stand out from the crowd a little bit more. So I did all the music I could. I got chosen for most of the sports teams except one, of course, and that was basketball, or we called it netball, because I was too small. And I remember distinctly how that used to bug me, and I'd rush off to the changing room every Wednesday morning and look at the team on the wall to see if I was chosen, and it didn't happen. Until one springtime, I remember it so clearly, they had a flu epidemic that swept the school and missed me for some reason. And I managed to get chosen because they had to. They didn't have anybody else to choose. And when I think back through that, that's when the title Walking Tall just popped out to me that day as a title for the book. So even though a lot of you have written books, I'd urge you to say, if you were to write your life history so far into a book, what would the title of your book be? That story of my life type syndrome. What would be the subtitle? What would be all the chapter headings that start spinning off that lead to that title? And that can really help you to crystallize and identify and articulate what your brand actually is and what you stand for. Something else that I often use with my clients is something that I call the Espresso Effect. And this is another way of perhaps getting to the background of who you really are, what it is that you really stand for, and the stories in your life. And let me explain what I mean by this. This is a whole thread that runs through a lot of my programs and can go very deeply, but I want to engage your brain with this right now. If you imagine an espresso machine and you imagine all the coffee beans that get thrown in at the top, all of them represent a pivotal moment in your life, an experience, a challenging time, an analogy that you can remember that someone shared with you. Again, something your mum said, maybe it was an achievement that you had, passing your cycling proficiency test, passing your car test, your first day at school, first day at college. All of these experiences that you have in life, all are represented by those coffee beans that get thrown in at the top. They all get ground and percolated around in the middle of the machine, and what you get from that is your values, your motivators, your drivers, your beliefs, your standards, your talents, your strengths. All of those things come from these experiences that we've had in life. And then that tiny condensed cup underneath, in its purest essence, purest form, that is your brand statement, your positioning statement, your story, your marketing statement. And if we can really get to a point where our marketing statement says something about us, rather than being just clever marketing words, that's when we start to get personality into the brand. And of course, a lot of these stories will spin off lots of opportunities for putting the stories into your presentations. And you hear all the time from Henry and Mark about the importance of stories in your presentations. That is so crucial. But from a branding point of view and authenticity, it's absolutely essential that you have those stories in there. So I want to just be quiet for 1 minute here, just 1 minute, to give you a chance to just engage with that, because I find that when I work with people on this, your brain starts to churn over and you start to think of stories and you want the time to think about them. We can just take 1 minute right now for you to go back through your life history and capture some of these experiences and jot them down in abbreviated form. It will just help you to carry on doing that as an ongoing project. And while you're thinking that through, think from your earliest memories, from age 0 to 5, your earliest memories to age 5. What are some of those? 5 to 12 is another good section of your life. 12 to 20, and then 20 onwards. It's going to be quiet for a bit while you jot some of those down. And this can be quite emotional as well sometimes. Okay, I'm sure that's helped to churn a few things around. Your brain's engaged with it. You'll come back to it, hopefully, and it'll give you some great basis for some stories. If you can build into a presentation, when you're making a business point, a story to reinforce that business point in a visual way, and then make it relevant back to the audience, it's a very compelling way to get your brand across. It's a great way of talking about what you might have achieved or your expertise without actually having to shout that from the rooftops. One of the stories that this always reminds me of, and is very relevant to perhaps the way I live my life and I do things right now. And I remember back to to when I was 5 years old, and I first started at school, at infant school, and we went on Wednesday afternoons to start with, and I didn't know any of the children there. And I remember my mum packing me some Maltesers, which are like malt balls, into my brand new school satchel. And in afternoon break, I stood in the playground and I got my Maltesers out of my satchel and started to eat them. And this little boy came running up to me. I still remember him so visually right now. And he said to me, "You're not allowed to eat those now. We all had our snacks at morning break. We're not allowed to have them in the afternoon. You need to put those away." So I started to put the Maltesers back into my satchel and then thought, no, this isn't hurting anybody. This isn't doing anything wrong. I can get them out and I can eat them. So I took them out again and started to eat them. And right to this day, I'm one to not necessarily always follow the rules if I believe there's a better way to do it. Don't believe me, I'm not a rule breaker, but I do sometimes think, is that really the best way of achieving things? And I'll always try and find a different way around it. So some of these earliest memories will tell you a little bit about how you perhaps operate. So just moving on from that and looking at expertise, some of these stories here will help you differentiate. Or just one thing I want to add to that before we move on to expertise is often people will say to me, I really find it tough to uncover what my real values are. What values, you talk about values a lot, Lesley, and values are, you know, important part of our brand. How do you really articulate your values? It's really hard to do. And one of the things that I often say to people is, when you're looking at your values, really think about the things that might drive you mad in life, that frustrate you, that even anger you, and see if you can turn that around, because that will enable you to come up with a value that is meaningful to you. So say, for example, somebody always turns up late to a meeting. That person's always 10 minutes late to a meeting. Really drives you mad, and they're never well prepared, and it's frustrating and often angers you. If you turn that around, your value may not be about punctuality, but it might be about respect for other people's time. So the things that drive you mad, that really frustrate you, that anger you the most, flip them over, and they'll often give you an idea of what your values are that really sit right at the heart of your authentic brand and your authentic core. So just moving on to another aspect of Walking Tall that I was going to share here today is about expertise. And when you've got these books and you've got your keynotes and you're working with clients, we're all so excited about the message and what we can do for people. I want to just give you another way to look at that just for a moment, is to think about what it is that your client absolutely gets as an end result of working with you. What's the output for them as an absolute end result? And often people miss this when it comes to marketing, to branding. It's still all about us. And a good analogy, some of you may have heard it, but it's the best way to describe this, and I use it a lot in my thinking and with clients, is that if you imagine going into a hardware store and buying a drill, you're not buying the drill, you're buying the hole in the wall, or you're buying the shelves to put the books on or the family photos on. That's what you're buying as an end result of what that drill gives you. You're not really interested in the drill. I'm certainly not interested in the drill. Most people aren't, unless you're my husband, who's an engineer. He's probably interested in the workings of the drill, but most people aren't interested in the drill and what the drill does to get you there. They're interested in the end result that the drill gives you. So think for a moment about what is that end result of the expertise that you have, that you give to your clients. If I articulate mine, it might just help you think about this. So really, if I break this down into various pointers here. First of all, what is the problem that I actually solve for people? What's the problem that they've got that they don't even know they've got? Because I'm an expert, I can see the problem that they may have. What's the cause of that problem they may have, and what does it cost them in lost opportunity or in financial terms? And then what is my solution? In other words, what is that hole in the wall that I give them? The problem that I can articulate, that I solve for them, is that they have this brand message all jumbled up like the strands of spaghetti in their head, and they can't see it, they can't articulate it, and that's the problem they have, is being able to identify and articulate it. The problem that they have that they may not know they've got is very much around perhaps people not being able to talk about them in a way they want to be talked about, to be able to refer them, because they can't really easily describe what it is they do. They may not even know about that problem. The cause of it is because they don't have the toolkit, they don't have the methodology, the structure, the platform, the system to be able to extract that brand and articulate it. And that's the cause of it. They don't do anything with it, they don't know where to start. And then the cost is obviously could be lost business, lost referrals, lost value in the business because of not having a clear brand. And the solution I have is to give people the toolkit to enable them to identify, extract, and articulate that brand message so that they can be consistent with its delivery and projection. So I'd urge you to really look at your expertise in that way, because that's where your positioning statements can come from. That's really where you can add a lot of value to your clients. So just finishing off there, it's a very quick session to give you some thought process, but I know there's going to be a lot of questions mulling around in your mind here. And what I'm always willing to offer at sessions like this is a 20-minute, just a virtual coffee with me, just to ask me any question that you want to, any question at all on branding. Do have something specific you want to ask me, and I'm really happy. I love doing it, just to be able to give people a couple of pointers, maybe a different viewpoint from a different lens, because I don't know your business like you do. I'm that set of eyes from outside the bottle, looking at the label from the outside in. So if you have a question, please just organize that virtual coffee with me. And that's you can scan that QR code now or use that link. So whatever's helpful for you. And I do hope to speak to a lot of you soon. But just leaving you with one quote. It was the great Oscar Wilde who once said, "There's only one thing worse than being talked about." And that, of course, is not being talked about. And I think if we can be talked about, but in a way that we control just that little bit more rather than leaving it to chance, then we've got a solid brand and we get those referrals and we build that reputation. So thank you all. I hope to speak to you all again soon. And thank you very much, Mark and Henry and the team for inviting me today.